Good evening, everyone. My name is India Lena González, and I am the features editor of Poets and Writers magazine. Thank you all for joining us in our celebration of the brilliant and inspiring group of authors spotlighted in our 9th annual 5 over 50 feature, which is included in our November-December issue. I would like to start off with a simple housekeeping request for all of us to keep in mind. We kindly ask that the audience remain muted throughout the entirety of the event so we can fully enjoy the authors without any disruption or background noise. All right, tonight's event will include readings from our 5 debut authors, which will be followed by a conversation about their individual paths to publication. Now, our incredibly popular 5 over 50 feature highlights 5 notable debut books annually across poetry and prose that are, surprise, surprise, written by authors over the age of 50. Year after year, our 5 over 50 authors have shown us what literary beauty can come out of years of living, working, tending to responsibilities, raising families, earning a living, building multiple careers, and continuing to grow into yourself as a person. They prove what we certainly believe to be true here at Poets and Writers, which is that the titles emerging and new can apply to us at any age or point in our lives. And there's no specific timeline for becoming a writer, nor is there a one-size-fits-all approach to be taken on the literary journey, which can have many twists and turns. This year, our 5 chosen authors have prudently used the fertile soil of their life journeys to produce works of writing that benefited from their having moved through what one such writer, Deborah Jackson Taffa, calls the potential callowness of youth, and into a space of patience, trust, experience, and healing. The 5 debut authors we are celebrating tonight wrote deeply insightful and honest essays for our print issue, in which they shared stories of listening to an inner voice urging them to be a writer, having a natural disaster bring them back to poetry, falling asleep with a pen in hand every night, honoring and exploring their inner child to the fullest, and coming back to the radiant energy of a manuscript shelved for years. There is also an online version of this feature, which includes excerpts from the 5 books alongside audio clips of the author's reading, and we will share a link to the online feature with you all in the chat. This evening, we have the absolute pleasure of hearing from and sharing virtual space with Suzette Mullen, author of The Only Way Through is Out, a memoir published this past February by the University of Wisconsin Press, Dorsía Smith Silva, author of An Inheritance of Drowning, a poetry collection published in November by CavanKerry Press, Uchenna Awoke, author of The Liquid Eye of a Moon, a novel published in June by Catapult, Deborah Jackson Taffa, author of Whiskey Tender, a memoir published in February by Harper, and Parul Kapur, author of Inside the Mirror, a novel published in March by the University of Nebraska Press. I'm so honored to have you all joining us today, and our hearty congratulations on the publication of your debuts. Now, for our audience, please feel free to utilize the chat feature and share any questions you may have for our writers throughout the event, and we will incorporate as many of your questions as possible at the end when we get to the beloved Q&A. And we have also created a bookshop page, including the 5 debut books written by tonight's featured authors, should you feel moved to purchase their works, which I think would make a fabulous holiday gift, if you ask me. So that will be shared in the chat as well. And now we can delve into the good part and get into the reading portion of tonight's event. So we're going to kick things off with Suzette Mullen, who is the founder of Your Story Finder Nonfiction Book Coaching and a founding board member of the Lancaster, Pennsylvania LGBTQ+ Coalition, a nonprofit organization committed to building communities where all can live courageous, full, and authentic lives. Her tiny love story, The Seed, which became her debut book, The Only Way Through is Out, was published in the New York Times Modern Love column. Suzette has earned a certificate from Columbia Theological Seminary and has degrees from Wellesley College and Harvard Law School. She loves sun-kissed rooms, watching her sons make their way in the world, and getting lost in a good book. Welcome, Suzette.
Thank you so much. I don't know what to do with these feelings, I said to Alice, my therapist, after I told her that I realized I was in love with Renee, my best friend. Should I tell Renee it feels dishonest to keep this from her? You don't have to share every thought you have. It's not dishonest to keep a zone of privacy, Alice said. I'd never thought about a zone of privacy, but wasn't that exactly what I'd been maintaining all these years, living one life in my head and the other out in the world? But what if I'm actually gay? What am I supposed to do then? So, what if you're gay? Alice said. You don't have to do anything about it. You've made a choice to live a certain lifestyle, and if you're happy with it, you don't have to change. I closed my eyes and smiled. It didn't matter whether I was gay or not. I didn't have to do anything about it. Nothing had to change. Evan, my husband, and I watched the Houston Astros at Minute Maid Park. A middle-aged woman in the front row in front of us put her arm around another woman. Were they a couple? I couldn't take my eyes off them. Gentle touches to the thigh, an arm being patted, a brush of the lips. They were a couple. My body ached. I wanted to sit with my arm around Renee at a baseball game. I wanted to kiss her lips. I wanted to touch her thigh. That was never going to happen. Not now, not ever. I have a good life. I love my husband. I don't have to change anything. Evan and I saw Hamilton the first month it opened on Broadway, cheered the Astros at Yankee Stadium with our sons, picnicked on cheese and bread from Zabar's, and sipped North Fork Sauvignon Blanc in Central Park. Evan snapped a photo of me supine on the lawn, plastic cup in hand, the sun hitting me just so. Perfect summer night, I posted on Facebook. My perfect life received lots and lots of likes. After the picnic, we made our way to the bandshell area, already packed with people, mostly younger than us, and settled into a spot close to the stage behind a metal barrier. But the stage wasn't where my eyes spent most of the night. They kept returning to two young couples on the other side of the fence, women in sundresses rubbing each other's backs, playfully kissing each other, swaying to the music. Did Evan notice them too? Did he know Ingrid Michaelson had a huge lesbian following, a fact I discovered when I Googled her after we returned home? What I would have given to sway freely on that side of the fence, to have my whole life ahead of me, to satisfy this longing that wasn't going away. But I was with my husband, a kind and loyal man who loved me, where the world said I should be, and where I had chosen to be. Isn't this great? Evan said, putting his arm around me. I put my arm around him. Stop this, I silently scolded myself. We went to see the Broadway musical Fun Home. The show had many poignant moments, a young girl singing about her attraction to a woman with short hair and a ring of keys on her dungarees, a 30-something drawing cartoons about her life, a college freshman, her hand on the doorknob, staring at a sign about a gay and lesbian support group. Please, God, don't let me be a lesbian, she pleaded. I wiped a tear from my cheek, hoping Evan didn't notice. I didn't want to be a lesbian either, because if that's what I was, how could I stay in my marriage? And how could I possibly leave? It was much easier to keep acting as if nothing had to change.
Thank you, Suzette. Beautiful. All right, moving right along. Our second author this evening will be Dorsía Smith Silva. Dorsía is the author of An Inheritance of Drowning, an 8-time Pushcart Prize nominee, a Best of the Net finalist, a Best New Poets nominee, a Cave Canem Poetry Prize semifinalist, an Obsidian Fellow, a poetry editor at the Harper, and a professor of English at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras. She has attended the Breadloaf Environmental Writers Workshop, the Breadloaf Writers Workshop, the Kenyon Review Writers Workshop, the Tin House Winter Workshop, the Looking Glass Rock Writers Conference, and the Poets and Scholars Summer Writers Retreat at the Institute for the Study of Global Racial Justice. Dorsía also has a PhD in Caribbean Literature and Language. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, India. And thank you for the lovely reading, Suzette. And thank you for those coming to listen to us tonight. And thank you so much for Poets and Writers. It's just such a privilege and honor to be here this evening. So I'm going to be reading some poems from my book. It's called An Inheritance of Drowning. And the book really looks at the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, which happened throughout the Caribbean and other parts of the world, and in 2017. And I also have some political poems in the book that look at the racial, social, political injustices in the United States. So this poem is the first poem in the book, and it is called What the Poet is Supposed to Write About a Hurricane. What the poet is supposed to write about a hurricane should be skylights of horror, not skip rocks of beauty in walls of wind, affixed to the puzzle pieces of the vortex eye, spinning like a lost continent soul. How the lively whip should stun the mouths of gravity, hissing without hesitation, engulfing the stench of uprooted dirt and grass. The poet is supposed to decode the stanzas, shudder the name Maria into frail syllables, to wish a hurricane a fast and gritty death, not say its stubborn slow dances, held intoxicating possibilities and mysteries. And the next poem I'm going to read is one of the political poems I was talking about that happens to be in the book. And it's one of my favorite poems in the book. It's called Ghost Talker Poem. And it's for all the BIPOC women that go missing and do not receive the national attention that they deserve. Ghost Talker Poem. And for the Black girls that go missing from newspaper headlines and spotlight 5 p.m. news, what happened to them? Kick the can over, see if the bones glint in the slips of sunshine. Press your ears against the grass, listen to what bleeds. My mother in her lovely tongue. Those girls are probably with friends, hanging out in the basement, wearing cigarette pants. Cigarette pants were fashionable once. They will turn up like loose change sidelined under sofa cushions, overdue books sandwiched in sweaters, favorite hairpins gagged by vents. Don't fret. Fret is a funny word for a young child. Sounds like forget. Don't forget. I won't. About the missing Black girls, probably already dead in a ditch or a field somewhere. I'm not supposed to think about death, passing away, kick the bucket 6 feet under, meeting our maker, which is what my teacher said. The class guinea pig had stopped moving. Mrs. Hayes poked its feet and then shoved it into a shoebox, said that we could bury it across from the tire swing in the back of the schoolyard. The dirt was ordinary, brown, hard. Eat your snack, said my mother. Twinkies from 7-Eleven, maybe Wawa, nothing from Superfresh or Pathmark. White filling, creamy like white fungus, oozing like zit pus, besmirching golden cake. The news says nothing about Black girls that go missing, not even a speck in someone's unread newspaper. Silence is when we inherit ghosts. I see them taking victory laps every night. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorsía. Wow. Lovely, lovely, lovely. All right. Following Dorsía will be Uchenna Awoke. Uchenna is a writer from Nsukka, Nigeria, and his short stories have appeared in Transition, Elsewhere, Trestle Ties, Oyster River Pages, Evergreen, Arkansas International, and other such publications. Uchenna has received fellowships from MacDowell and the Vermont Studio Center. He was the inaugural Arkansas International Writer at Risk Fellow and currently lives in Iowa City, where he is attending the University of Iowa's MFA program in creative writing. The Liquid Eye of a Moon is Uchenna's debut novel, a Nigerian catcher in the rye that breaks the silence about a hidden and dangerous caste system. Welcome, Uchenna.
Thank you, India. Beautiful reading to my friends who read from their wonderful books. I'm going to read a section at the opening of The Liquid Eye of the Moon, and then a small section from chapter 15 because they highlight important cultural differences. I like to walk in the morning since I came to the US, not up to 2 years ago. I would meet people walking their dogs, and then I would quickly cross to the other side. And then I would see the surprise on their faces, and I imagine them wondering, saying to themselves, why is he so afraid of dogs? And I want to say that I think that dogs in the US are very fortunate because half of the dogs in Nigeria are stray dogs. They are on the street because their owners don't feed them well, and they are quick to bite. So you can see where my phobia is coming from. Yeah, I read. Yesterday in my mind, I reburied Okike, my aunt, in a proper grave. In a coffin, my memory grabbed from Aku Road. A beautiful white box edged with a blue stripe. A patterning of hibiscus with yellow blossoms embossed on its lid. Sometimes I sneak out to Aku Road to see the coffins sampled outside carpentry workshops, edging the fine arc of the road in all their colors and shades. The road is a piece of artwork that I walk with my eyes, rising where it rises and curving where it curves. Even the Bishop Shanahan Hospital fence is artful in the way it curves, then rises elegantly as if determined to hold those coffins back from strolling in and claiming their bodies waiting in the mortuary. I picture the coffin makers standing in their dusky workshops behind piles of their coffins with ambitious stares that call for patronage. Their bare bodies covered in fine powdery wood dust and a sheen of muzzle gloves. But passers-by always look the other way, always focused on the curve of the Bishop Shanahan fence opposite. Fear and repulsion rimming their eyes, like the dark lines of coal around my mother's, as if by merely looking, they are summoning death. Okike's actual grave in a garden near our house has been overtaken by weeds, half buried in wide growth, umbrellas of mushrooms and small climbing grasses sprouting widely over it. My mother tells me that today marks a decade since her death. I am going to weed the grave neat in commemoration of her passing, and one day I will make Okike a tomb. My mother says Okike lived with us when I was a child. She looked after me. She and I enjoyed a special bond, my mother says. To be him, she wonders at such closeness. I have never seen a child that close to an aunt, even more than he is to the mother. Sometimes I close my eyes and imagine Okike bathing me, soaping me all over, oiling my scalp and patting my baby neck and tender back with talcum powder, folding me in tapas and tossing me up in her arms, a happy, smiling, fat thing. But did I wear diapers as a baby? I can't seem to connect my small village of Oregu, a remote rural place in eastern Nigeria, with the townshipness of diapers, talcum powder, and coconut oil. Or this tough-looking boy that I see in the mirror to the round baby of my imagination. My village must have been full of naked toddlers without birthdays, or enlarged photographs of their childhoods, taken in studios and displayed on smooth painted walls. I probably grew up the same way, naked and running around with poop in my buttocks. One of those pot-bellied, food-loving imps, whose mothers would beckon the family dog over to lick them clean. I smile each time I indulge myself in those thoughts. But my mother talked about my childhood without nostalgia. She said I was a snot-faced child with nameless longing. I would cry loudly, squealing like a squirrel bucked off a ripe palm nut. Ibekazi, my mother would tease me. You always preferred to be tied to the back of your aunt, and when anyone tried to take you away to ease the poor girl's body, you cawed and fought like a crow, nearly clawing out their eyes. When she said this, I hid my face and said nothing, feeling slighted that of all the pretty birds in the village, it was a crow my mother likened me to. But in her good mood, I could ask, what did Okike do when I squealed? My mother smiled. When my mother smiles, you catch a glimpse of distant beauty. It flickers and is gone fiam like the dash of a glowworm. When you squealed because you needed to suck my breast and I had gone to Gige Market, she said, Okike plucked her nipple into your little mouth and sang for you until I returned and kissed away your snot and tears. My mother said I sucked like I sucked her like there was no tomorrow, and even suckled Okike's milkless breast for comfort. Like 7 famished puppies, she chuckled. After you fed, you insisted on going up again on Okike's back, leaping with happiness. So much for my mother's similes. First a crow, then 7 famished puppies. But I was a big sucker, and that's the truth. I am amused and sometimes angry when my mother retells this story. Angry because I am embarrassed. Amused because it is my love story, my childhood, the beauty that lies in not knowing the difference between breast milk and breast. And because my mother never gets tired of this serial retelling. I ignore the sickly looking dog, counting her ribs at a glance. We've always had a dog in this house, from Ogodu to Ekuke, and now Bingo, who eats shit with glee, with a body covered in scabies. She once defecated into a pot of soup. My father beat her until she lost her voice from crying, and then she sat away from us afterwards and watched my father with sad eyes. The best meal that Bingo gets is soured food from my mother once in a while. If my sister or someone forgets to warm a meal and it becomes too dangerous for us to eat. Otherwise, Bingo survives by eating excrement and hunting lizards and mice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Uchenna. It's such a pleasure to be in all of your worlds. They're so distinct and so full and rich. So hearing it back to back, it's really impactful. Wow. Okay. Our fourth reader this evening will be Deborah Jackson Taffa. Deborah is a citizen of the Quechuan Yuma Nation in Laguna Pueblo and the author of Whiskey Tender, a recent National Book Awards finalist. She is also a 2024 National Endowment for the Arts Fellow in Prose, with praise from The New Yorker, The New York Times, Zibby Mag, San Fran Chronicle, Publishers Weekly, and Electric Lit. Whiskey Tender is an Amazon editor's best choice book, with fellowships and grants from PEN America, McDowell, Hedgebrook, Rona Jaffe, Tin House, A Public Space, the Ellen Malloy Fund, Kranzberg Arts, and the New York State Summer Writers Institute. Taffa is the director of the MFA in Creative Writing at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Take it away, Deborah.
Guadzi, hello from Santa Fe. When my parents left their wedding reception, Mom was sober. Dad, of course, drove. He sped towards 4th Avenue, the main thoroughfare in Yuma, cutting into the opposite lane on corners, fishtailing with a groom's finesse. Mom grew scared. She hiked up her wedding dress, reached her long leg over his thigh, and stomped the brake with her high heel shoe. The tires locked up. The car swung wide to the right before spinning them all the way around to the left, showing them the surprised expressions of people in other cars. It was like we were riding on the tilt-a-whirl at the Yuma County Fair, Mom said. The car slammed into the side of a busy downtown bar. The Plymouth's front end was mangled. Steam poured out of the radiator. It was a Sunday afternoon in April 1963, and the day was still light. Afternoon drinkers came flowing out of the bar's smoky interior like rice throwers coming out of a cathedral in a haze of incense and prayer. Being the eldest of 15 kids had made Mom conspicuous in this small town, and the bar was her father Juan's favorite. So some of the regulars and barflies realized she was a Herrera girl and wanted to know if she was okay. Sirens started up in the distance. A couple of biker chicks helped Mom out of the car, and she stood with them on the sidewalk in front, staring at the damaged headlight and hood. In her hurry to get out, she'd caught the train of her wedding dress in the door, and it had ripped. When she saw the torn fabric, she started crying. She told us, "I could see your dad through the window of the car with his forehead rested on the wheel, and I knew exactly what he was thinking." Dad was from the Yuma Reservation, across the train tracks and river, and he was worried the town cops were going to book him again. But when the cops pulled up at the accident scene and looked at Mom, plopped on the curb in a puff of white satin, mascara running down her cheeks, they decided to be merciful and let Dad go. Mom said they felt sorry for her because she was a good, local Catholic girl who'd married a crazy Indian. When Dad walked in the front door and heard her telling us the story, he laughed and said she was wrong. He said the cops let him go not because they pitied her, but because Mom was beautiful and pretty people got away with shit. He pulled off his black boots and lifted his holy socks onto the coffee table. He put his arm around her and said getting away scot-free on their wedding day was the first sign Mom's charm would work magic in his life, like a lucky rabbit's foot or a powerful tattoo. He reminded Mom how romantic he'd been at their wedding, how he'd refused to let her sisters decorate the car with do-it-yourself flowers because the phony tissue paper looked too common for a woman of her caliber. Instead, he and his brothers had performed a top secret midnight operation, sneaking into St. Thomas Indian Mission's garden on the reservation, where they cut a bunch of roses to string over the roof of the car. Mom groaned, "Don't brag about stealing from the church." But the two of them laughed, and Dad went in the kitchen to grab a snack. Mom's protestations never fooled me. She loved the memory of the stolen roses, as well as Dad's claim that her beauty swayed the cops. But what made her light up especially was the way he called her his lucky charm. This is how my parents twisted bad things around, seeing the appearances of events in funhouse mirrors, stretching memories tall and pretty when they were really goofy and squat. They knew a story could be told in various ways, and this is how they chose to shape theirs, and how they would teach me to shape mine as well, by molding their wedding day car accident into their first blessing as a couple. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Amazing. Wow. All right. We're going to round out this reading with Parul Kapur, a novelist, journalist, and literary critic. Parul spent her early childhood in India between Bombay, Calcutta, and New Delhi, and immigrated to the United States with her family when she was 7. She graduated from Wesleyan University with a degree in English and holds an MFA from Columbia University. Her debut novel, Inside the Mirror, won the AWP Prize for the novel and was longlisted for the Center for Fiction's 2024 First Novel Prize, as well as the 2024 New American Voices Award. As a journalist and critic, she has written for The New Yorker, Esquire, GQ, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Art News, Art in America, Guernica, Slate, Los Angeles Review of Books, and the Paris Review. Parul currently lives in Atlanta. Welcome.
Thank you, India, and thanks everyone for being here. And I just want to say I'm really honored to be with such an interesting group of over 50 writers. So it's really nice to have this event and to be here. I'm going to be reading from my debut novel, which is Inside the Mirror. And this is a story basically of twin sisters in 1950s Bombay, India, right after colonial rule has ended. And they both aspire to become artists, but to become artists, and artists of different kinds. To become artists, they basically have to break their lives apart, their family apart. And so the cost is great because women simply didn't have that freedom or power at that time, leave alone even in our time. It's sometimes difficult. So I'll just read the opening pages. Chapter 1. Inside the gunny sacks were the makings of a man. There were 2 bags, roughly dividing the bones for the upper and lower halves of the body, and Jaya had not wanted them inside the bedroom. But her father said they should not be stored on the balcony during the monsoons, where she'd kept them last month, because they might start to smell in a heavy rain. The servant boy had climbed a stool and placed the sacks on top of the wardrobe at her father's instruction, her mother grimacing as the thin boy raised the bundles overhead. Jaya had been told to ask the servant to retrieve the sacks for her whenever she was ready to work in the afternoons. Instead, she had moved the rootless bones once again. She'd removed a pile of household wreckage from the corner between the wardrobe and the wall, a broken towel rack, loose shelves, boxes of childhood belongings, and pushed the bone sacks into the space where she could easily reach them. Today, she had pulled out both bags, not only the one containing the bones of the upper body, which she had to mark up. She hesitated before removing the rib cage and placing it on an old sheet spread over the durry on the floor. She glanced behind her. The door was shut. No one liked to see her laying the bones on the bedroom floor and taking her red chalk to draw a line where a muscle originated and marking in blue chalk where the muscle inserted. Now she took out the brownish basin of the pelvis, searched for the long shaft of the thigh, and found a fully formed foot. All the knotty bones threaded together. These were new bones to her. She had not dared to assemble them like this before. The first couple of times she'd set out to do her assignment, she had asked Kamlesh to stay in the room on the pretext of holding open Gray's Anatomy for her. Searching inside the sacks was frightening. All sorts of forms coming into her hands, rough protrusions and smooth cavities. She'd have to pull out a number of bones until she found the ones for the arm that they were dissecting in college. Her twin had frowned and asked to leave the room, looking so distraught that Jaya realized she would have to do her work in privacy. If their grandmother happened to be in her alcove at the back of the bedroom, which the three of them shared, Jaya would ask her to shift to another room, and Babaji would rise from her bed, taking with her the many newspapers she read religiously every day. Babaji found it indecent for a person to handle human remains. From her writing table, Jaya fetched her pen and ink bottle and tore a sheet from a tablet of drawing paper. She tacked it to a small plank she used as an easel. She sat on the floor, leaned against Kamlesh's curio cabinet, and considered the skull with its clenched set of teeth and hollow eyes, the winged hole of the rib cage, the rod of a femur, and beneath a gap of white sheet, the fan-like foot. The morgue prepared the bones from the bodies of the unclaimed dead found in the roads and railway stations. Each first-year medical student was partnered with a fresh skeleton. Here were the pieces of a man. Who had he been? Jaya drew the rib cage with a slower hand. The trunk of the sternum and looping branches of ribs needed close attention to be given form as a whole, with lines and shading. A splotch of ink spread on the half-made foot, the toe sharp as pincers. A thought came to her. How do you become someone? She wrote the words like a banner in a fluttering script and capped the pen, lifting the board from her lap. For a moment, she let herself drift, closing her eyes as she tried to feel some connection to the man. Moving on to the bed sheet, she slipped a few feet away from the fragmented figure she had laid out. Aligning her body parallel to his, she lay down, wondering if she could assess the man's height, discern something about him. The bell rang. The front door banged shut. Hirabai must have answered. Jaya could never hear the maidservant's barefoot movements in the flat. Clicking steps hurried down the passage. Their mother called out, "You've come, Kamlesh?" Jaya was pushing herself up when her sister opened the door and caught her sitting beside the partially assembled skeleton. Her twin made a face, clutching a parcel to her chest. "What are you doing? Making the whole thing up?" "I wanted to try drawing it." Jaya stood up and arranged the pleats of her sari. Her nervous hand went to her hair, which was bound in a neat plait down her back. "They want you to draw the full skeleton?" "No. I wanted to see how the bones fit together." "Just like that?" Kamlesh squinted at her. "Yeah, just like that," said Jaya, bending over to gather her art materials, then the bones.
Thank you. That's such a beautiful opening. I still remember reading that in your novel and being like, wow, all right. Thank you all for the gift of hearing your words read aloud with such care and such grace. Really, a round of applause. That was quite something. As I have all the authors join me back on screen, we're going to head into the Q&A portion of tonight's event. And as a reminder for the audience, if anyone has any questions for the authors, please feel free to share it in the chat, and I will try my absolute best to incorporate as many of your questions as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started now that we're all back on screen. So this is a question we've asked our 5 over 50 authors over the years, and I think it's become somewhat of a tradition for us to ask it. So I'd love to ask you all, Do you think that publishing your debuts when you did had more to do with internal or external forces? So in other words, was it a result of not finding the right agent or publisher until recently, or receiving a series of rejections, or needing to dedicate your time to other more pertinent areas of your life? Or did it have to do more with your own internal clock and needing more time to continue writing into or to start writing your respective books, and perhaps also no longer needing permission to write what and how you want?
I'll jump in. I think that just like for me in my coming out journey, I feel like I came out when it was the right time and I was ready. And I think the same thing with becoming a published author. I think I was just, the time was right for me to tell this story. And that's the best. So I would say it was internal. It was part of my internal journey versus external forces.
I think for me, it was a combination because I was also working full time. I have a child, so I was balancing all these other responsibilities and commitments. So writing was there, but I could not dedicate myself fully to it. But at the same time, when I was composing In Inheritance of Drowning, one more time for a photo, I had to really sit and think about, okay, this is the formation of the book. And for me, that was definitely an internal process of just sitting down and thinking, okay, how do I want the formation of the book? And the only way to get there really was just to kind of have this moment of separation, like separation anxiety of a parent with a child, to say, okay, the book is ready now to go off into the world. So I really had to learn, like, just to let it go and be fine with the book. And that was also an internal process because you have doubts as a writer. You're thinking, well, what if I just revise this? Or what if I move this here? What if I change this? And at some point you have to say enough, send it out, and just, cross your fingers, whatever you believe in, the poet gods, the writing gods, and just wait for the acceptance. So that was really my experience, a little bit of both.
Yeah, for me, I think the both played a role. I am a middle child in my family, three girls coming before me and two boys and one other girl coming after me. My sisters, my elder sisters, married as teenagers. They did not even have the opportunity to go to school. And then I found myself saddled with the responsibility of looking after aged parents and making sure that my younger ones got basic education. And so I did migrant work. I was all over the place doing manual labor to live up to my responsibility. And it's difficult to survive as a writer when you don't have fixed income. Mm-hmm. When you don't have a regular job. It was very difficult for me. I would walk from dawn to dusk, and then when I try to write the night, I find myself dozing off. So, but I persisted. I told myself I had to persist. I had to fight on. I had to try to win this literary pugilism. And so I fought until I was accepted into McDowell. And then there I had the opportunity to interact with other thinkers across diverse fields of study, and to partner with other writers into insights on the publishing process. And that was how I was able to meet an agent, and then here we are today. I'm published, and I'm proud to be published. Thank you.
I would say for me, others have also said a combination. I think I had to mature a lot as a writer because I started this when I was in graduate school, which was in the mid-'80s. And, and I had a very large kind of scope for the novel, like it was going to cover several generations of the family later, and as I went along, I realized I didn't have the skills to do as big a novel as I was thinking I could or imagined. So partly it was my own sort of developmental journey. And partly I think because of the time when I was starting out, like in the mid 80s, there were almost no writers of color or, Indian authors or anything like that. Maybe a few like Anita Desai, but, she was considered exotic and she lived in India. So I also feel like the space in American publishing at that time, New York publishing, certainly wasn't ready, I think, for somebody like me, because there were other people in my MFA class whose novels were also relatively underdeveloped, but then they got agents, they got the editorial help to really, really put together a manuscript because those novels were set, in the US. People here, which is mostly a white reading audience, I think at that time could relate much better to that kind of story than to mine. So partly it was a matter of time and, and also time for me to mature as a writer.
For me, I think I kept thinking, you have one shot at a debut. And it wasn't enough just to publish a book and to feel like I did it for career purposes. I wanted it to be something that felt that I had struggled over time to really perfect, that it was going to be my big opportunity. And in fact, I had an offer for publication prior to publication that I turned down because I just wasn't sure it was ready. So there are some passages in the book that I wrote over 25 years ago. And I went to Iowa City to get my MFA. I graduated from there in 2013. So it was like a palimpsest. I just kept going over it and over it and over it. And I wanted every page to sing, and I wanted it to have the right sort of context about what it meant to be raised in Native America. I put my family on the cover of this book, like my dad and my sisters and my dad and his brothers. And it was just there were so many ethical considerations about how to expose my family, why, in what sort of, under what sort of terms. And for me, that had to do a lot with interweaving histories and governmental policies. And I mean, what a joy. Yesterday, I was named one of the top 10 books of the year by The Atlantic. And I could have never dreamed that that would have happened when I first started writing the book. But I knew that I wanted to hang on to it. And I did not want to think of myself as being in competition with other writers. And in fact, I have so many writer friends that when I see them writing something really good and I feel like a little surge of possible jealousy, I always praise them effusively right away, because I came to this because I love this art, and it affirms my love of the art to have a mutually supportive community of writers, And so people would ask me, what's taking you so long? And I would tell them, well, everyone has to decide for themselves when they feel ready to take something to market. And the thing that I always urge my students is be patient. What do you have to prove? It's not like, at least for me, it didn't feel like I had anything to prove to anyone but myself.
Mm. And how do you all stay persistent over the years? Like, how do you keep in your mind, I'm a writer, I'm going to keep writing, come all the things that come your way with job, family, things like that? How do you not fall by the wayside?
I would say that for me, I was a journalist, so I was always writing, more or less. Because when my son was born, I wanted to like devote time to him. That was very important to me that, I was thrilled that I was a mom. Finally, that was also a little bit late, but, so I gave emphasis where I wanted to at a certain time in my life. I was, so for what my son, at least the first 3-4 years, was a lot of it was dedicated to him, although I was still like revising this current novel. And then I would do a lot of like arts journalism. And then I put my novel away for like 12, 13 years because I wanted to do other things. I wanted to free myself to do other things. So, and yet I still had it in my mind. So if I would meet somebody like an artist or something, then I would want to go interview them. So I kept trying to like bring new things into the novel. So I never lost a sense of myself as a writer because I was also a journalist.
Oh,
I think
yeah,
it,
it's my
oh,
it's my turn,
sorry.
right? Oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
No. I thought it was my turn. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I think it really helps to have encouragement from friends and family. And then, of course, there are some editors that'll just give you, praise and they'll say, you know what, this is great. I think you're on to something. And then that'll be the catalyst to say, you know what, I think you're right. And that really does help you as a writer to kind of keep you motivated and to say, you know what, there are so many things that I want to say. And I'm also, especially as an educator, I always tell this to my students. There are so many things that need to be said, and who else is going to tell that story but you? So put your story on paper. Tell it, because there are just so many stories that people will say, oh my goodness, I read this and it moved me. I was inspired by this. And so you never know until you put it on paper. So I think I'll pass it now on to you.
Uchenna.
Okay, yeah. For me, I think I didn't have to struggle to keep writing because despite all writing has always been a natural progression for me. I always wanted to write stories that would captivate readers because I read so many stories growing up. Uh, uh, I read the Nigerian Pace Setters series, so many of them, and I was fascinated uh, uh, at the way the writers wrote stories that were so captivating, and I wanted to write like them. So I didn't have to struggle to continue writing despite all odds. It was just a natural progression for me. Thank you.
I can really relate to that, Uchenna. I feel like I write from internal pressure because I have anxiety about my life and I need to figure the world out. And I feel like when I'm not writing, I'm kind of I'm at dis-ease, when I'm busy doing. And so I have 5 children. And when they were very little, I would wake up at 4 a.m. and I would write until about 6 or 7. And everyone thought that was crazy. And then there have been other times where I write late at night. I write around the edges of the day if I have to. I was very privileged that I was a stay-at-home mom for a while, so I could write intensely. And of course, your MFA years give you a lot of uninterrupted time. But I feel like if you can quit, you probably will quit. I feel like most writers, they're obsessive about it. And so it's like it's a way of communicating with yourself and kind of putting your finger on those things that feel unresolvable in your life. And so I go to read when I can't write. And by reading, I get inspired to write. And sometimes that's just reading old work of my own. You start to read, and before you know it, you start to cut a line and fiddle with something and change it. And suddenly you're writing because you're editing. So everything counts. I mean, reading, editing, the generative kind of state of mind is the hardest for me to kind of enter.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on a few things that were said. I absolutely feel, I was compelled to write the story. I couldn't rest before I wrote the story. I wrote the story to first understand the story, to figure out what the story really was. And I'm also a book coach. So one of the things that the first question I ask every writer I work with is tapping into your why. What is your deep why for writing this piece? And I think that helps you keep going when you do have those doubts. Those inevitable doubts are going to come up along the way. I have no idea what I'm really writing. Why am I bothering? Is anyone going to care about my story? All of those things. And having clarity or reconnecting with your why for writing whatever it is you're writing, I think is the key to persistence and getting to the finish line.
Thank you. All right, I'd like to start putting in some questions from the audience here. So I know that some of you all have agents, some of you all don't, but everyone's published. So could you share with us how you all found your agents and or how you found your publishers and what that process was like for you all?
I'll go first just because I did not have an agent. I did query agents and I did not find an agent. And I also began querying, it's such a hard word to say. I began to send queries to Smaller presses that you could directly submit to. And I made a curated list of some of them were university presses, some of them were just other smaller presses. And my publisher, the University of Wisconsin Press, had a series that was focused on LGBTQ plus memoir and biography. And so I mean, it was a beautiful moment. I wrote this in the essay. I sent my query letter out, and within hours, within like 2 hours, I had a yes from them. At least they were interested, and we began our journey. So really, as I said in my essay, it just takes one yes, the right yes. So
I'm so sorry. You want to go, please?
I'll just say quickly that I didn't have an agent when I won the contest, but one thing I did for I said I put this manuscript away for I think 12 to 15 years. The years kind of run together for me, but in that time, the Atlanta Writers Club really developed as an organization. And so twice a year, they had agent and editor conferences where you could submit your manuscript, like the first chapter or so, for critique. And I started to attend those. And first I was, submitting the first chapter of my novel, this one, to see if I could get an agent, because you can meet with the agent. So if people have these kind of writers clubs that have, conferences, I found that really helpful. And then I started a second novel. So I started submitting more of that. And I could always tell, if my first chapter or, first 25 pages was good, because then I would get a lot of interest from the agents, and they'd say, we need a full manuscript, but I'm very interested. And they would give me their card. And so I had at least, 12 or 15 cards. And so when this book won the contest, I wanted an agent to help me even get the contract with the University of Nebraska. I wanted an agent, I wanted to keep certain rights and things like that. And so one of the agents that I had really liked from the Atlanta Writers Conference, or a couple of them. And so then that's how I got my agent, because I said, my book has been accepted, and would you be interested in representing me? So I'm glad that I, did that thing, even though people thought it was a waste of money. Why are you going to the Writers Conference if you don't have a novel complete? But it gave me a lot of good feedback.
I think for me, finding an agent, writing personal essays and publishing them in very prominent publications. So like Salon Magazine, the Huffington Post, the Boston Review, the LA Review of Books, places that agents are reading. It serves you in two ways. One, it tells you that your level of craft is becoming professional enough to enter into those, sort of publications. And two, it kind of makes you visible on a national stage. I would have to shout out here Bridget Hughes at a public space in Brooklyn, because she runs a fellowship every year that everyone should apply to. She picks 3 fellows. She has a great eye for picking people who end up doing very well. And she works with you personally for 1 year. If you don't recognize her name, she was the first female editor of a Paris Review. So the Public Space Fellowship is fantastic. She works with you for a year, and then she invites you out to the Brooklyn Book Festival. And she had host you for a reading with the other fellows, and a bunch of agents and editors come out and watch, because she has a reputation of being able to find good writers who are just kind of emerging. And my agent found me through that reading. And she's with George Borchardt in Manhattan, fantastic. She's the VP of that literary agency. So I would encourage everybody to, continue sending your work out there to highly visible magazines and publications, and to look for opportunities like a public space, or possibly even apply to that fellowship, which is a great opportunity. Baby steps will get you there.
Anyone else?
Okay, yeah. Like I said earlier, I was awarded fellowships like the Dowell and the Vermont Studio Center. At Vermont Studio Center, I met Robert Lopez, the wonderful writer, Robert Lopez. He was a visiting writer, and I showed him my work, and he took interest in my work. He gave me my first professional criticism, which is so valuable and so memorable. And so I learned to use critique to improve my craft from him. And then he went ahead to introduce me to my agent, Annie Dewitt. And then Annie uh, you know, Kendall, and he pitched the story, and then Kendall's story of Catapult took interest, and that was how I got published. Yeah.
Okay,
I just
great.
wanted to say really quickly, I don't have an agent, but for poets out there and other writers, it's okay. You can still get published without an agent. And I had really great advice about finding a publisher. They told me at Breadloaf, they said, listen, think of writers that you admire and look to see where those writers are published, and then see if they have contests, if they have, open readings. And I really was interested in CavanKerry. CavanKerry had an open reading. I sent my manuscript and it was accepted. So there's hope out there. If you don't have an agent, don't be discouraged. Don't feel like, oh my goodness, I'm never going to be published. Just really believe in your work and just keep sending it out. There are so many different publishers. So may have a list. Some people have like a template, a chart. I just really had my heart set on CavanKerry and they said yes, but other people will send it to, 10, 15 places. So it's up to you, but pick a publisher that you feel comfortable with and that you think that they'll support your work. I think that's also really important to keep in mind when you're trying to look for a publisher.
Yes, and thank you for bringing up that difference in genre as well for agents for poetry versus prose. That's a huge one. And for everyone out there, we do have a grants and awards database. So if you're ever looking for literary contests to submit to, and some of them are specific to writers over a certain age, over 40 or 50, please check that out. We can drop that link into the feature, the chat feature. And we also have a literary agents database. So if you would like to go the literary agent route, we have that as well, where you can peruse and try to see who might be the best fit for you. So please use those resources because they're at your disposal. Another question that I think is really a good one to touch on, since I think everyone here has MFA training or has gone to school for writing, someone from the audience would like to know, do you think that the MFA imposes a particular style of writing? And I'd also like to open that up and say, do you think it's necessary to get an MFA as a writer?
I'm going to jump in really quickly because I do not have an MFA. My master's is in public policy. I do have a PhD in literature, in Caribbean literature and languages, but that was a completely academic, background for my PhD. There was no creative writing involved at all. So my opinion is, if you have the skill and merit, then that's what you have. I think the PhD gave me the discipline to really be a good writer, in the sense of you have deadlines and like, okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to edit my work. But as far as having, skill and talent, I think you can perhaps, look for that, if that's what you're looking for, by taking workshops, by taking, informal classes. Some people are in writing groups and they learn that way. For the people that I know that have gone to MFA, they said that the connections were really important, and they felt really support from their cohort group. But I think if you don't have an MFA, you don't have to be discouraged again from having, your work, wondering if your work is going to be published or not. And there are plenty of historical examples of people that are wonderful writers that do not have an MFA.
Amen to that.
Yeah, I think I'll come in here. I do not have an MFA. I published not have an MFA, but then I am in a program. I'm in the writers program, Iowa writers program now currently, and I think it's wonderful. I think I'm getting very useful help from my amazing professor San Chang and my wonderful, talented group. I'm getting useful help. So I think MFA is very important. But then I want to say that I published without having an MFA. Yeah.
I don't have an MFA either. So three of the five, I don't have an MFA either. I have a, history degree, a law degree, and somewhat self-taught, but then started going to writers' conferences. Southampton Writers' Conference is really where I got my first really formal workshopping training with Mary Carr was the first workshop leader I had, and Roger Rosenblatt. And then I've been in pretty hardcore critique groups. And then I trained as a book coach. So I learned how to, I learned how to coach other writers, but I really learned how to become a better writer myself in the process. So MFAs sound great, and just like Dorsía said, it isn't the only way to go.
Mm-hmm. I think an MFA program can be a weird combination of very wounding and very kind of intellectually stimulating. So for me, going to Iowa was like I received the freedom of a lot of time to write because I had a fellowship. And then I got to study with people like Maggie Nelson and Ethan Kanan and Jeff Dyer, like amazing writers were there. That was a really wonderful thing. And your cohort, like the conversations continue beyond the workshop over to George's or the Foxhead, places where people go. And you can kind of argue with people with whom you disagree in a civil way because everybody is so impassioned by literature. To me, kind of the environment and being with other people who cared so deeply about words was irreplaceable, even though I think it was kind of in some ways it was one of the hardest things I ever did because you're challenged a lot. Like you write things and then people come in and they tell you why it's not right, and you really discover your voice and you learn what you're going to fight for and what you're going to let go of, and you also become very aware of your own cognitive dissonance, like blind spots that you have. And that's very important for a memoirist in particular because we're creating a persona of ourselves on the page. And I think one of the things that surprised me at the MFA was how many people that I disagreed with kind of showed me exactly where my rhetorical strategy was missing a step. And they, in some ways, strengthened what I was trying to do, even as they wounded me. So I don't think it necessarily has to be an MFA, but somehow you must strive to be both sensitive and open to criticism. It's a weird thing to be a writer. You have to have a really hard skin to put up with the criticism at the same time that you have to be soft enough to continue to feel and be vulnerable on the page. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't happen via diary or journaling. You have to go to some sort of community workshop. You have to get it, whether it's a low distance MFA like the one I'm the director of, or whether it's in person, or whether it's community. You're going to eventually have to deal with an editorial process that is akin to an MFA.
And I just want to mention, like for me, as I said, I went to Columbia in the 80s. So that's like a whole different era, or, eons ago, the way the workshop was run, the writer couldn't say a word. I mean, it was a very, what we consider old-fashioned now and very kind of classic mode. And so then, when I wanted to kind of get back, and I had moved to Europe. So around the year 2002, I moved back to America. And so much had changed, right? Especially with the onset of the internet, because I was finding out, through Facebook groups, et cetera, what other people were doing, other writers. I think there's a great resource in summer writing workshops. Like, let's say you can't go to an MFA program. Then those 10-day or 1 week or whatever summer workshops, like Tin House, and then I went to the Yale writing workshop because I was moving close to there. Squaw Valley, like some are really hard to get into. So if you get in, then your writing, is rising to a certain level. And there you will get the workshop. You will meet other writers. Maybe you can have a little like threesome who critiques each other's works or something. Like I've had these tiny clusters of friends from different workshops, and even though we don't really critique each other's works, I know there are other people who do, but it's just really good to have those writer friends, and they will tell you where they're submitting. That, you just get a lot of ideas that you would not have on your own. And you get that criticism. So I would say try the summer workshops. There might even be, and also like maybe your city has a writers club, like the Atlanta Writers Club. They have so many different critique groups. That's another, option.
Yes. So many methods to go about being in community and finding people to help, brush up against and figure out what works, what doesn't work within a larger group of people. Let's end on one final question. I don't want to, but let's do that just so we, respect with everyone's time. I think this is a nice practical one. Do you all have a daily writing habit and or just more generally, what would your writing habit be? What does that look like for you?
Well,
I
I'll
ab
jump in.
oh,
Oh, sorry, please.
You want me to go? Okay.
Yeah, please.
I absolutely do not have a daily writing habit. I kind of write in spurts, and when I have a project or a deadline, I do work with a book coach. So I have accountability and deadlines, and so I tend to write a couple of days a week. I have time dedicated to it, and sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't, but the deadlines are what motivate me. So it is not a daily practice, but it is a somewhat regular practice.
I am going to also concur. I don't have a daily writing practice either. I'm a full professor, so I teach all day Tuesday and Thursdays. When I come home, I'm just completely drained. I have no energy to kind of give to my writing on those 2 days. So then that leaves Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then Saturday and Sunday, I also have a very active child. So I'm, my mama hat, driving my child back and forth to different, sports and different activities. So I write when literally I have time. So what I'm finding is like sometimes I'm waiting in the car for my child and there I am with my pad of paper or my phone and I'm jotting down my ideas, my poems in between my classes. Sometimes if there's like a little break and I have the mental, ability to kind of focus and concentrate, then I'm thinking, ooh, this is an idea of a poem. And then I do it that way. So I wished I could just, retire early and then just write every day. But I have 6 more years until that's a possibility. So until then, I just try to, use the free days that I have where I'm not teaching to write. But it is a bit of, the balancing, juggling act.
I actually had started working before, before my novel on the contest, et cetera. Like I was working on this other novel that I have. And so my writing has always been kind of erratic. Sometimes I'm working a lot, sometimes other things happen. Like a lot of things have happened in my life also, especially in the last 5 years. So like for this novel, for instance, it was like 25 years. It took so long to draft. And then once it won the contest, it was 195,000 words because the AWP contest had no word limit. Now, if you look, they have a word limit because of my novel. It was 195,000 words, and the University of Nebraska Press said it really can't be more than 120,000, and you have to cut it on your own. So that was an intense 4 months of just like round the clock kind of work to cut it down. And I worked with a freelance editor. So I have those kind of intense spurts, and then it kind of depends what's happening in my life. So the writing coach was trying to get me to, be more disciplined. And I think if you can be disciplined, that's obviously better than not being disciplined. And I think also I would give myself too many hours. Like I would say, okay, I have like 7 hours today because I didn't have a job and my son got older, but that was too much time. So if I think my ideal would be to like squeeze it to like 3 or 4 hours and give myself some kind of word count. Word count actually works with me instead of hours if I give myself a word count per day.
I like early mornings, and I think part of it is because when I write, I think very much about creating a ritualistic space. So I have like candles that I light. I like to see the sunrise. I had a friend in Iowa who moved to the big city after he left, and he would sit on his stoop and look for a certain combination of license plate before he felt he could go in and write. Because I think what I'm trying to do is step out of the quotidian and enter a space where I'm acknowledging the magic of words, which to me means that I could be writing beyond to somebody who's yet to be born if I'm doing it right, that the words could be reaching people after I'm dead if I'm doing it right, that there's something that's non-temporal about the magic of writing, like these little squiggly black lines on a page that transcend time and culture. And so I think a lot about ritual. And if I'm going to dive back in the middle of the day, I try to do the same thing. Like I try to go for a walk. When I'm actually writing a lot and I'm involved in a project, I always remind myself that a good 70% of writing happens away from the desk. Like you keep mulling over what it is you're thinking of creating in the scene, and your mind is kind of finding solutions for you. And it's really important to be able to pull out your phone and take some notes. So I tell people sometimes, like, oh, I'm not writing right now. Lately, I've been traveling a lot because of this long book tour that I'm on. But it's not true, because I always am writing. I usually just write in little snippets throughout the day, like Dorsía said. It's inevitable for me that I put things down, and then later I go collect it. Don't throw away stuff that you've written. That's another thing that I think people do, is like you put a lot of time into something and then you just kind of, you don't honor the person you were when you sat at the desk and did it. Go back and gather old work and look at it and try to take it to a deeper space. Let things accumulate and build up.
Yeah, just like Deborah, I like to write early in the morning. I also write little snippets. I see my pen as my catapult. I go everywhere with it and shoot at words and ideas like birds. I could stop to jot down something at the grocery, on a bus, wherever the muse descends. Yeah.
Lovely. All right. It has been so very special sharing space with all of you this evening and listening to the five of you read and respond so wisely and graciously to as many questions as we could possibly fit in the time that we have. On behalf of Poets and Writers, I want to extend our gratitude to Parul, Deborah, Uchenna, Dorsía, and Suzette for joining us over Zoom and adding your necessary and beautifully rendered stories to the world with the publication of your debuts. We will drop once more in the group chat the link to our bookshop page, including all 5 titles, and the ability to purchase them, as well as the link to the online feature where you can listen to and read excerpts from their books. Thank you as well to our very active Zoom audience for spending time with us this evening. Tonight's event has also been recorded, so a video of the readings and the Q&A will be available soon on our YouTube page, as well as on our website in the coming days. This officially concludes the celebration of our 2024 5 over 50 authors. Thank you all for joining us, and I'm wishing you all a joyful and rejuvenating end of the year. And to end on the words of Suzette Mullen from your essay in our print issue, please remember that it really is never too late. Until next time.
Thank you so much, India.
Thank you, India. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, India.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.